Welcome to the Investment Banking Leaders Podcast, brought to you by the Investment Banking Leaders Club, your exclusive access to the industry's most successful leaders. These experts have closed thousands of deals, generating hundreds of billions of dollars, and they're here to share their strategies, insights, and leadership lessons that can fast-track your career. But the learning doesn't stop here. Join the Investment Banking Leaders Club at ibleadersclub.com for even more exclusive insights, leadership frameworks, and career accelerating resources and events. Thanks for joining us, and best of luck on your growth journey. So I'm pumped for today's discussion. We have another top guest for you all today. I'm joined by the founder and managing partner at Edgewater Strategy Group, Hawken Lord. Hawken's journey started at Morgan Stanley as an investment banking analyst in the FIG group, while simultaneously taking on a strategic consulting role at Argent Strategies. His next step was a 3-year stint at HIG Capital, gaining significant PE and LBO experience. But after leaving HIG to do his MBA at Harvard, Hawken saw opportunity to provide high-quality M&A services for hire, and the same year, Edgewater Strategy Group was created. Now, if we fast forward almost 4 years, Edgewater is really changing the game. They now have 15 team members and offices in 3 countries, and Edgewater is rewriting the script by providing M&A and Office of the CFO services to some of the industry's biggest names. So Hawken's route to entrepreneurship has not been traditional, and his story is certainly inspiring. So I'm beyond excited to get into it with you today, Hawken. So thanks for joining us, and welcome to the Investment Banking Leaders Podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I'm pretty excited.
Definitely. Conversation, long time in the making. Why don't you start telling our listeners a bit about Edgewater Strategy Group and what you're doing for your clients?
Yeah, I think it might make more sense to give a little bit more how it started, because it's not a very typical service. It is not one I set out to go do. I more stumbled into it. And it really was, as you were mentioning, in that transition between HIG and Harvard Business School. I was supposed to have 2 months off, where after the 3 years of very hard work and a lot of experience, I was going to go travel, see my family, and relax before business school. But as I was about to set out to leave, one of my portfolio companies was in the middle of a lender renegotiation. And it was a very intense modeling project. My principal told me, look, we know that you're set off to go to business school and we're excited to potentially have you back, but we don't want to transition this work product over to a new associate right in the middle of it. We would like you to finish it for us. And we know that the travel and reconnecting with your friends and family is very important to you. So why don't you work for us as an independent contractor? And I didn't know that was an option. And so I said, you're telling me I can do my job, but I can be anywhere in the world and do that? I said, yeah, absolutely. We'll pay you a weekly rate. Okay. Well, business school is pretty expensive. I was married at the time. So look, maybe I'll make a little bit more money, leave on a better note with my former employer. So I'll take on this work. And as I was finishing that up, a vice president at Charles Bank, which is a Boston-based private equity firm, reached out and said, hey, I'm looking for someone that doesn't want a career at Charles, doesn't need any training, can help me do an add-on acquisition, because all my associates have left. They're either going to business school or they're going to other firms, and the new ones haven't ramped up. So I said, wow, okay, it's actually very similar to what I'm doing at HID right now. I'm happy to do this, get a little bit more money in my pocket. And so as I did the add-on acquisition from abroad, I was surprised to find that the vice president was very impressed with the work. So I thought to myself, wow, HIG really taught me something valuable here. So maybe I can try to do something entrepreneurial and see if other people need this type of service. And that's the day I stepped on HBS's campus, is the day I started Edgewater. And as you mentioned, fast forward almost 4 years now, we've done work for over 70 clients. We've been fortunate enough to work with clients like KKR and HIG, but more and more, we're starting to work with general corporations when they're buying, selling assets, and more now with independent sponsors, people that have private equity deals, but don't have deal teams and need that sort of help to execute it. And so the way that we position ourselves today is we're a boutique advisory firm specialized in M&A and Office of the CFO. And the way to think of us is a deal team for hire. Whenever you need that capacity, we come in, we execute, we leave. We're not on your payroll. We're typically an EBITDA add back, so no one gets hurt, and you get your deal.
I love that. We jumped straight into it, and I guess those 2 months off didn't transpire, but something much more exciting did. And as I said, the story is inspiring. I love how it's almost organically sprung up, and then you've taken it on from there and really seen this need to be captured in the market. So really exciting. I had lots of questions in mind to ask you about the PE industry, and I think we're gonna have to go back to them at another point. I wanna stick here whilst we're here. So talk to us, what does it take to set up your own firm?
It's, I didn't have a lot of time to think about it, and I just dove right into it. Looking back at it right now is understanding how much of a risk you're taking. And so any entrepreneurial venture takes a lot of risk, and especially when you don't have capital behind you. So I didn't go fundraise. A lot of my colleagues at Harvard, they all set to do fundraisers for their entrepreneurial ventures. And so they were able to pay themselves a salary that they know was guaranteed for a while. This was coming out of my own pocket. So I had to be focused on being profitable from day one. And so
Wow.
every person I hired, every investment I made was literally coming out of the Lord's household pocket, right? So I was dipping into savings. I was making sure that every project I took on, sometimes I took on projects that on an hourly basis didn't make any sense, but I needed to have case studies to show people what we were capable of doing. And so maybe on an hourly basis, I was working for $15 an hour, but it allowed me to be able to have work product and be part of deals that would show people what we were capable of doing. So that sort of risk is not something that everyone is willing to take. Sometimes you do need to raise money to be able to withstand that type of risk. And then the other thing that I find pretty funny as an entrepreneur is, and this is coming from working in private equity, we always talk about working capital. We always do working capital analysis, but it was always an analysis on an Excel book that I did, never something that touched me personally. And now I would see my financials and I say, wow, I made this much money, but that's not the cash that's sitting in my bank account that I can take in because I have to accrue for bonuses and that comes out of my pocket. I have to make sure I make investments, CapEx investments, buying everyone laptops and monitors and stuff like that is real cash going out the door. And I'm accruing expenses that I need to make sure I have the cash for. If people take longer to pay you than you would like, I'm sure you understand that. So how do you deal with the fact that you have these fixed costs, but maybe your client will take 60 days or 90 days to pay you or pay you at close, which is never guaranteed, right? So that's the type of risk and working capital that have really affected me personally.
I love that. I guess it sharpens the mind, like you say, when the capital's coming out your own pocket and actually gaining the experience for the models that you're building for others. As you say, again, that really sharpens the mind. So I love that. And looking back now, what would you say have been your biggest lessons from setting up Edgewater?
Yeah. Managing people specifically because we are a professional services company. Our assets are people. And so it's great when you're hiring the smartest people that you possibly can, but they walk out the door, right? And so the value comes from making sure that they understand they are valued. Your people are valued. You're treating them as perfectly as you can, given the circumstances. And one thing that has affected us and has been a very tough learning process, that little things can become very big things if you don't address them or follow up early on. One of the examples is that we will make decisions. Me and my co-managing partner, will make decisions and we'll implement those decisions and we'll communicate it. But sometimes our people won't give us feedback immediately. And then in our minds, we've closed out that actionable item. And 3 months later, we get feedback that people are very upset by the decision we made 3 months ago, and which we were very flexible in changing, but no one wanted to speak about it. And so these little things that we thought were just easy decisions and we put them in the drawer and we move on because we got a lot of bigger fish to fry. They're stewing in the background because people were not necessarily comfortable bringing up their hesitations to them. We've realized that the little things can become very big. And sometimes we make very big decisions and people are very happy and nothing happens. But it's these little ones that you have to make sure that you follow up with people and say, hey, how's it going with this decision we made a month ago? And make sure there's nothing brewing in the background that could affect performance.
And is that what you've learned really? It's that quick follow up, that asking for feedback more frequently and trying to get in, even when it's those decisions that you don't think are going to have a big impact, just making sure that everyone's on side.
Asking for feedback in general, both from our people's perspective and from the client's perspective, and then finding that back is this feedback loop that we're always focusing on because we're building this company. 3.5 years old, but 2 of those, I was in business school. So we're building the plane while we're flying it. And we need to make sure that nothing is falling apart while we're doing it. And so on the one hand, providing feedback to our people about what they can improve, absolutely. But also giving them the feedback that what they've done has been a huge success. And so whenever we get client feedback that's, oh, this is amazing, or this work product really changed, or they tell us about the impact that we were able to do. And we have many case studies about tangible impact that we don't see because we're in front of monitors all day, but that actually affected people on the front lines of certain companies. And we make sure that we explain that back to the analysts and the associates that work for us. They say, you were part of this, and this would not have happened if it weren't for you. So it's providing the feedback to improve on both sides as managers and employees, but also providing the feedback with what they've done matters and making sure that they are appreciated for the work that they perform.
Yeah, I love that. I can really relate to that. We have a really talented graphic design team at Halptrum that's working on the designs to celebrate these transactions that you all have, but they're not speaking to the clients. That's really the job of our account managers. So knowing the designs that land and how proud our clients are of the actual pieces they're sharing with their clients goes a long way. So I can really relate to that point. And I think those that are building businesses or aspiring to be founders, I think getting it right in terms of managing people and communication is so important. And
Be happy to hear we just did a student fair at a
okay,
university, and our analysts brought their favorite deal toys that they
love
have.
that.
And so we had a beautiful banner about Edgewater and what we are. On the desk, we had several deal toys presenting so that people could ask, what is this?
Yeah,
And then they would speak to the transaction and why we celebrated it.
I love that. A big smile. And I'll definitely feed that back again to the graphics team because I know they'll be happy to know that those pieces inspired. That's why we're in the business. So thanks for sharing that. Let's sit on culture. There is a buzz around and excitement around your firm and around your team. What are the secrets to building a great culture? I guess we touched a little bit about communication, but what else is key for you?
We're fortunate enough, specifically Will and I, who's my co-managing partner, we both worked together at Morgan Stanley. So we saw what we loved about the Morgan Stanley culture, what we could improve if we were ever in charge. And then we both went to different private equity firms and we learned the same thing. And now we're in a position that most people never have, which is to learn from the best private equity firms in the world. So every time we do a new project, we learn from them and we see how they interact with their team. And so the idea is to learn from the best and leave the rest, both from the work product perspective, but also from the culture perspective. And we're trying to understand why people stay at certain firms. The first thing that we were trying to do is make it a very flat organization right now. We're trying to avoid the hierarchies that tend to happen in investment banking. Now, we understand why they're there, but right now we're too small. We don't have enough people. We don't have enough resources to institute those hierarchies. So we have to let people make more decisions closer to the client. And so when my analyst is working directly with a client and I'm on another client call, they have to know that they don't need to message me, clear everything by me, that they can go make decisions. Now, they can suffer some of the consequences that come from that. And I'm okay with it because it's a learning opportunity. But they know that I have their back in case a client gets upset. I will take full responsibility for that, but it's a huge learning opportunity for them. And so it's the idea of knowing, and for us, culture, that what you do makes a true tangible impact and that you are the captain of your own ship when it comes to these projects. And we're here to supervise, we're here to do quality control. But the more we see our superstars producing, the more we give them control to go and lead these projects themselves. And so that has been very valuable, especially at the young age. Our workforce is in between like 25 and 30 years old. Like I'm 32, I'm the oldest guy there. We're a very young workforce. And so being able to have that sort of responsibility at that age is not something that's very typical in our industry. So that has been fantastic. We make it absolutely clear that, and we do this through reviews. We do 360 reviews every quarter, that you guys are in charge of your own culture. So we have a wonderful team in Bogota, Colombia that helps us execute projects. And we explain to them that if you're unhappy with something about the culture, you need to communicate that to us. And you're also responsible for it. You need to act on it as well. And so there's something that's bothering you, or the way that certain activities are done, you think they could do it better, then it's your responsibility to improve that. So it's a culture that's always improving upon itself. It's not brought from top down. We're building it together.
That responsibility and the empowerment comes with that, right? It's so powerful. Be part of it. You're part of the culture. You drive it. You're responsible for it. So I love that. And the flat hierarchy makes sense. And giving that more flexibility, more control over the decision making, learning by doing the reps, but maybe at a quicker rate within the right sandbox. Yeah, I love that. Thanks for sharing some tricks there. And any more information on how you handle recognition within your team? You've touched on a few times the importance of making them feel valued. How do you handle recognition within the team?
Yeah. I touched on a little bit, right, about whenever we get client feedback, but I think to make it more tangible is we have internal communications that everyone can see. And so it's not always just good enough to reply directly to the analyst or forward an email that we got from a client saying thank you and how impressed they were to that analyst, but they need to be recognized by the good work from their peers. And one recent example that happened last week is a model was sent out to a client and the client replied with, "This is the most beautiful model I've ever seen." And that was a very funny adjective to use for a model. It's not typically what we aim for. We like to aim for impressive, exactly, right? But they came back with beautiful. And so we took a screenshot of that and we sent it to the group chat of the entire firm and said, we tagged the analyst who said, "Congratulations, you've now gotten the award for the most beautiful model ever produced at Edgewater." And on the one hand, it's funny, it's great, but it celebrates the fact that it was a great work product and you wouldn't have gotten that feedback. So making it known across the firm and globally, everyone knows that was Pablo's model, right? And getting that recognition, obviously from your superiors, but also from your peers. And so we made sure that when feedback needs to be presented, it's presented just to the individual, but when it's great feedback, then it's presented more on a firm level.
That's great. Fostering that peer-to-peer recognition is key. I think sometimes firms get lost in the weeds. It all has to be pushed from top down, but it's not the case. And we have a little platform where each team member recognizes good pieces of work and good displays of values at Outram. And that's globally. And then we give out awards based on that on every 4 months. It's really powerful stuff. So I can definitely relate to that. I want to talk a little bit about M&A and PE. They're super competitive spaces. And we know that there's a war on talent and you're growing rapidly. So how have you navigated your talent acquisition effectively?
Yes. So again, with limited resources, it's very difficult for this industry in general to go after the best talent. So we try to come at it from a different angle, and we're trying to do talent arbitrage. And what do I mean by that? Is Will and I were very fortunate to have the backgrounds that let us get into investment banking and private equity. So we both came from Ivy League undergrad schools, and we were both fortunate enough to get positions at Morgan Stanley. And that sets you up to recruit for the best private equity firms. We know there are a lot of people out there. They're extremely smart, extremely hardworking, and they're just looking for a chance. Now, these people might not get full-time jobs because of their backgrounds, but they can work through with us and work directly for these clients and get the same experience. And we're right now in the talent identifying business of who could have been a top analyst at Morgan Stanley. But because they didn't have the Ivy League background, they never got that chance. So we're providing that chance and we're giving them the same experience that they would have had at Morgan Stanley, as even more because all we do is execution work. When I was at Morgan Stanley, I did half my time or more was done with pitches. We don't have time to pitch. All we're doing is execution work. That's what we're brought in for.
Sure.
So they're closing more deals than I did when I was at Morgan Stanley. But we need to identify the people, and we're also taking on the responsibility of training them in the same way that Morgan Stanley would have trained them. And so we're trying to identify those value gaps between the opportunity that they never got, but the right persona from an intelligence perspective and hard work ethic that they would have succeeded at Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs.
That must also help with the culture that we just talked about. That purpose,
Yes.
that drive, that opportunity that you provide is super unique. So I love that. I'm sure you don't want to give away too many of your tactics, but do you have special things you're doing to really identify that talent?
It's very difficult for us, and I haven't found the perfect way to do this, to identify who are those special people from just an interview alone. Know how people can understand how an individual is going to perform on the job from several interviews. Now, I understand people look at case studies and stuff like that, but we're taking it a step further. And we know that people in universities and coming right out of school, they want to buff up their resumes and they want to say, we've worked with a KKR and other types of firms like this. So once we've identified people that we think could have potential, we don't always hire them full time. what we do is give them essentially a trial period to work with us, knowing that we're not fully committing to them, but they're getting the right experience on the resume so that if they're not Edgewater material, they can take that experience on the resume, easily go find another job. And so we are giving them a trial period that not a lot of other firms can do that. And so whether it's summer internships or internships throughout the school year, we're finding a lot more talent at University of North Carolina, for example, Chapel Hill. So we have several students at UNC that are working with us and we see great talent. And we're investing in them, giving them that experience. So if they decide they don't want to work with Edgewater, they want to go somewhere else, that's totally fine. But we're also identifying who are the great players that can provide value from day one. And we're trying to snatch them up as quickly as possible.
Love that. I won't push you anymore. You can keep the rest of the secrets to yourself, but I like that model. It makes a lot of sense. And when do you the most about someone when you're working with them, right? So it's good to get that in and to experience that. So I want to take a step back for a second. We have a ton of listeners who are in investment banking, but maybe thinking about making that transition over to PE, which you did. So how did you transition from investment banking to PE successfully?
You have to define what you mean by successfully, because at the time, the idea was if there were 1,000 investment banking analysts in New York, there were about 300 private equity jobs. So you had a 1 in 3 chance, and you're competing against all the top analysts, right, in these firms. Now, this was in 2016. My idea of successfully transitioning to private equity is I wanted to be at Blackstone, at Carlyle, at KKR, and I wanted to be in an industrials group, a consumer group, something that was very recognized. But I didn't have that opportunity because when I joined Morgan Stanley, I got placed into the financial institutions group, FIG. Now, for many listeners that don't know, FIG, they cover banks and insurance companies. And it's a fantastic group. It's also a very active group. So if you wanted deal flow and you wanted to do transactions, FIG was a great place to do that. But the modeling and the way they taught you how to value companies was very different from a traditional consumer, healthcare, or industrials company because it's considered balance sheet based modeling. Now, what do I mean by that? Liabilities and assets are almost flipped on the balance sheet for these companies because a loan is an asset for a company, and that's how they make their money for a bank. And so you can't use EBITDA because EBITDA is before interest. Here, interest is the source of income. So you can't do EBITDA. So you're transitioned into a very different type of financial modeling that cannot be used in other industries. And so what ends up happening, or what happened to me, is I got interviews at KKR, I got interviews at a lot of these larger funds, and they were very hesitant to hire me because they said, look, you've never modeled healthcare companies before, and your colleague at Morgan Stanley Healthcare has. So we're obviously going to take the Morgan Stanley healthcare analyst over you. And so I got rejected from all the top private equity firms for the specific groups that I wanted. Now, a lot of them said, we love your profile. We think you'd be great for our FIG group at the mega fund. But the problem is if you start in FIG and you move into private equity FIG, you will always be in FIG. You don't have a tool set that can move you out if you decide that you don't want to do that in 5 years. So after the initial wave of recruiting, I needed to change my tack. And so I decided to go after middle market firms that did anything but. And I was fortunate enough that that's
a switch.
Yeah, right. And I needed to convince them to hire someone that wasn't big. And I was hoping that since all the top analysts were already hired at the mega funds, that I could compete and try to convince someone to hire me and that I was smart enough to do this. And I was fortunate enough to get an interview at HIG Capital in their Miami office. But when I stepped into the interview, the first question I got was, we don't hire from FIG. Why should we hire you? And the answer I'd come up with at that time was, if I could learn how to model FIG and I could learn this industry in 6 months, which is a very difficult sector, then I can learn any sector. And that resonated with the hiring manager because HIG is a very generalist program. And so they will do anything but FIG and real estate. And so as an associate, you have to get smart on an industry very quickly, learn the terminology, learn the risks and the benefits of being in that type of industry. And so that when you show up at the management meeting, you show up at the first meeting and meet the management team to do your diligence, You can ask the right questions. And because that resonated, I got the full-time role, and my first transaction was in the consumer space. 3 years later, I did one in industrials and one in healthcare. So I was no longer the big analyst.
Love that. The grit to find the area where you could move and make a difference. And some great feedback for the listeners, right? About being careful about where you are in terms of the group, your specialism, particularly if you're wanting to move into PE, and then maybe how to overcome it if you are caught in that. So if you are in the FIG team now and you want to move out of that, I think Hawken's got some great advice for you. Do you have any other advice for those that are interested in moving to PE, things they should know or that would help them with that move?
Yes. There's two things that really, looking back at my experience, I could detail out about recruiting to private equity. One was recruiting was a full-time job. And this is very difficult when you're already working in investment banking. Investment banking hours are known to be 80 to 100 hours a week, which leaves you very little free time to study and to network your way into private equity. So you know that this is a commitment that's coming as soon as you join and hit the desk in investment banking. And I was fully dedicated to it. That's what I did on my weekends. That's what I did at night when I had free time. And despite my girlfriend's objections at the time, that's what I was prioritizing to make sure that we had a job opportunity to look forward to after my 2 years at Morgan Stanley. And the other thing was that your reputation really matters. And this is something I could have improved on a lot because I came into Morgan Stanley with the mentality that I was here for 2 years, I'm going to leave. But these relationships truly matter. And where your colleagues are going to end up from Morgan Stanley is very impressive. I just saw one of the associates I worked with at Morgan Stanley. We worked on a deal together. I just saw his LinkedIn profile earlier this weekend. He's the CEO of an insurance company now. And so those relationships and your reputation will really carry you on. And specifically in the first 3 months that you're on the job, because it's very difficult to change your reputation after that. So when you come and hit the desk, you got to hit the desk with all intention of performing at 110%. And what that allows you to do is it will open up opportunities. And I know of managing directors at investment banks that will call up private equity firms and will say, hey, Peter is a fantastic analyst. You should really look at him and give him an interview if you're interested in hiring a top star. But it also goes other ways as well. They can close doors for you. And when you're in the middle of a deal and you get an opportunity to interview at a private equity firm is not going to change their schedule for you. So if you have a great reputation and a great relationship with your associates, for example, the associate will cover for you while you're at the interview. And that won't happen if you have a bad reputation and you haven't performed as well as you could have.
Great tips. The relationship part comes up so much. And I've written articles about this off the back of interviews with leaders such as yourself and how everyone talks about that networking piece, that relationship building piece, and how if we could look back, I wish I'd done it sooner and better. And I like the fact that you lean more on the reputation side, right? That's key. Definitely something to think about. If it's not your long-term plan, make sure that you're still delivering at a level you're proud of and that builds that reputation. And I know you shared with me in one of our chats that you really appreciated the growth opportunity that you got at a young age in PE. And I'm already thinking back now to what we just talked about with your firm and how those opportunities for those that want to get into industry and work with big firms you're providing. But I know you appreciated that opportunity. And I know you said that they don't exist as much in the IB world. So wanted to get your take on that. What happened and why is this?
This was specific to my group, and my group was the largest revenue generator of the investment bank at the time. It had a lot more resources and it became very hierarchical. So when I worked on a deal, I had an associate, a VP, an executive director. That was before even any work product reached the managing director. And what that mentality provided for me was the fact that I knew my work was going to be reviewed 4 or 5 times. So I didn't necessarily have to have extreme and full ownership over my work product. I would rather do it faster. And instead of taking that extra hour to review all my work, I knew it was going to be reviewed anyways. I would make sure that I got the comments done as quickly as possible, that I got the model done as quickly as possible, but I never took a step back and really owned what was it say? What was the implication? I also didn't have the opportunity to present it to the managing director myself. And so someone else was going to control the narrative. And if that person was going to control the narrative, then I didn't have to think about the narrative. Now I understand why that structure was put in place in investment banking. But it was completely flipped, and it was a transition period that I needed to get through when I was at HIG Cap. HIG, they don't have as many resources. I had a vice president above me, but sometimes there was no principal and you go directly to the partner. Now the vice president is managing third parties. He's got his own set of things that they have to take care of and that they're responsible for. And so when it came to doing the internal business diligence and the modeling, when we would sit in the partner's office, I was the one in charge of presenting it and explaining what it meant. And many times in the middle of diligence, the partner would look at me and say, Hawken, what do you think about the deal? And that was terrifying to me, coming from a situation where I never had an opinion and no one asked my opinion. Now all of a sudden I had to have an opinion on everything. And that also moved into the operational side as well. When we bought a consumer company, I was part of a deal team of 4, and the deal team was very busy. And after we purchased the company, we had to do some operational improvements, as we always do in companies. And we sat down in the boardroom at HIG's office in Miami, and we said, these are the things we want the CEO and the CFO to focus on. Now we need someone to go over there and present it to them and get their feedback. The partner had a lot of travel. The principal was on another deal, and the VP was also on 3 other deals. So they look at me and go, Hawken, you are to fly over there and talk directly to the CFO and the CEO, who are twice your age, and explain what we want to do as HIG and collect their feedback and provide value to them. And obviously on the flight over there, you are in full imposter syndrome, because who are you, a 25-year-old, to talk to someone that's 50 years old and has 25 years of experience in an industry to try to explain what we're trying to achieve? How do you even get respect in that sense? But I was forced to step up to the plate. And because of that, if I hadn't had that experience, I wouldn't be able to do what I do today. I have to speak in a level of confidence, and I have to have conviction with the decisions and the advice I'm providing. There's no one above me to check it anymore. And so I have full responsibility the same way HIG told me I had full responsibility of my work product. And that was a very difficult transition.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see why it'd be difficult and a fast learning curve, but how the ownership and the empowerment can have a real powerful effect, and obviously has. And you built those skills, as you mentioned, that you have today. What do you see as the biggest challenges for private equity today?
Private equity is in a difficult position right now because of the lack of exits. So they've purchased a lot of companies, but right now, if they sell their portfolio companies, they're not going to get the same exit multiples that they could have in 2022. And to add to that, 2022 was a huge deal frenzy where people were deploying a lot of capital. Private equity firms were deploying a lot of capital, and they were paying 1 to 3 times more EBITDA multiples than they were typically used to. And there was a scarcity aspect to it. Everyone's chasing the same deals, willing to pay up more. And now that exit multiples have normalized, they're having a difficult time to sell these companies, because in order to make up for that exit multiple depletion, in a sense, you have to offset it with large growth of organic EBITDA in the company, or paying down huge amounts of debt, which is very difficult to do. So the only alternative for private equity firms is to hold on to those companies until the right time to sell comes about, so you can get those multiples. Now, what has that led to? The lack of exits have led to the lack of liquidity for the limited partners. The limited partners are not getting their distributions that they're expecting after 5 years. And so they don't have the money to be able to put back into private equity. So fundraising has become very difficult for a lot of firms. And we've seen a lot of fundraisers that have started and they've stopped. They're on pause at the moment. And when someone does close a fund, and if they're even oversubscribed, it's a huge press release that you'll see on LinkedIn and stuff like that, because it is a very difficult feat. So you're starting to see a bifurcation of the top performing private equity firms that can fundraise and the ones that were fundraising when times were good, but now have to wait.
Really easy to understand. Thanks. And I know that there's labor challenges with PE companies, right? And that's why the deal team for hire model works. So can you talk to me a bit about that?
Yes. If you study entrepreneurship, you'll know that having a business model is great, but also timing is everything. And I don't think if I had started Edgewater earlier or later, we wouldn't be the firm that we are today. And it comes with the opportunity we had in 2020. So I started the firm in September 2021. when I stepped on campus. And 2022 was a huge year for M&A for private equity. There were so many deals. All the firms were having trouble with junior capacity because a lot of people were quitting at the time. They were going to other private equity firms or leaving the industry altogether. You also had associates that were coming from investment banks during COVID. So they weren't in the office. They weren't trained as well as they were typically trained. So you had associates that were not at the same caliber that the private equity firms were used to. And I was getting calls and referrals. I wasn't even looking for the business from all these private equity firms that wanted someone that could help them close deals and were happy to pay whatever the fees were just to be able to close the deals. And so I was helping close deals in 2022. At the same time, private equity firms were rushing to hire as many people as possible because they thought maybe this was the new normal, this type of activity. Well, 2022 ended and 2023 came about, and that was the opposite. 2023 was a year with almost very little M&A activity, and all the private equity firms found themselves with too many people on their payroll. And so when I would reach back out to my clients, I would say, hey, I have capacity at the moment. What are you working on? They said, Hawken, we love your work, but we have no need for you right now. In fact, we have too many associates and too many VPs. So it doesn't make sense for us to pay you anything when we have too much capacity. So 2023 and 2024 were years of what I would call right sizing the ship. And that was private equity firms looking at their staff and understanding what is the right amount of associates and VPs and principals that we need to have on our payroll for a certain amount of deals. And now moving into 2025, we realized like that really hasn't moved quite a bit. And the M&A market hasn't picked up the way that we were hoping for. But every once in a while, a private equity firm finds itself short of capacity because they have too many deals. They're not going to go and hire again the same way they did in 2022. So we're there to provide the flex capacity for those funds so they don't have to overhire anymore. The idea is we're going to have great execution team that can be leveraged by every private equity firm when they have too many opportunities and they never have to worry about overhiring again.
I can see how that model is so powerful, right? The balancing of resources. Where are we now? The tariffs, the instability in the market again. There's going to be, I'm sure, as you mentioned, that private equity is going to get busier. That dry powder's got to come out. When's it going to happen? People aren't going to want to grow too fast because of what they've learned from the last time. So I can see why, when you put it that way, the deal team for hire with quality work is such an important model. What's next for you and Edgewater?
We're building the right team. We're going to expand on our M&A and Office of the CFO services. The Office of the CFO came about organically. We thought we were just going to be M&A experts, but every time that we would help a private equity firm close a transaction, immediately there's a lot of work to do, especially with reporting and cash flow forecasting. And we're very good at FP&A work, but especially like in the middle market, in the lower middle market, a lot of the times you buy a founder-owned business and the CFO is the brother-in-law. And that's great for the time being, but when you have leverage on a business, it's not good enough. And you need someone that can handle the type of cash flow situations that happen with private equity firms, especially if things don't go according to plan. And we would plug in naturally as an FP&A service, but we weren't advertising it. And so at some point we decided, look, we need someone that has a lot more accounting background, has a lot more CFO background. One of our clients of 3 years, we had a great relationship. He is an excellent CFO. And we decided to make an offer for someone that has way more experience than us. Said, hey, why don't you leave the portfolio company that you're working at? Come with us. You'll work for many different portfolio companies. You'll never be bored. And we'll build a team around you. And we started that in November of last year. And the success has been unimaginable. We're turning down more work than we can provide at the moment. So we're trying to build out a bigger bench of CFOs and controllers. It's a very strong need that a lot of private equity firms have. Getting quality talent in the CFO space is very difficult. And so we're competing there organically. And I think the idea over time is to have Edgewater as a platform for anything related to deals. Start creating services that make sense organically with people that want to lead these divisions in a way that they can have equity and they could perform in a much more flat organization and be quicker and nimbler and just focus on what they love doing, which is providing the device or the work product for the clients. And so we're hoping to be a huge platform in the future for anything deal related.
Super exciting. Good to see that's coming on nicely, and best of luck with that growth November and already into 2025. So good luck with that. Believe it or not, Hawken, it's flying by and we're moving towards the wrap. So just a few quick questions left. Everyone who listens to the show knows that I'm a big believer that leaders are readers, maybe not just books these days with all the other materials available. But what do you recommend that's had a really big impact on you?
Yeah, I do a lot of reading. I'm actually reading a Churchill biography at the moment. Hopefully our friends across the pond have a lot to teach us. One of the books that I recommend to my team, and I'm a very big fan of as an entrepreneur, was Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. Really helped as a leader. It's very difficult to put your pride aside and say, I started this firm. This is my firm. I'm the leader. And especially when it comes to a professional services company where your assets are your people. And in reality, you got to be able to look back and say, my people are the reason why we're successful. And you got to give them the recognition that we had discussed. The firm's success is their success and vice versa. But whenever there's a problem and something wrong happens, that is completely my fault. Even if they make a mistake with a client, something like that, there are questions that you can ask yourself as a leader. Say, okay, why did that mistake happen? Did I not give them the right resources? Did I not give them the right training? Did I give them a little bit too much control of the deal too early? And I should have recognized that. But every mistake and everything that goes wrong with the firm is us as the leaders, Will and I, it's our fault. And you have to take extreme ownership of that. And then vice versa, it's his concept of decentralized command. We cannot make every decision or else we're never going to grow. And so giving the appropriate amount of leeway for our team members with the right guidelines in place so that they can make the decisions and succeed on behalf of the company. So Extreme Ownership is a huge book that has really changed my outlook as a leader.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. We'll pop that in the notes for those that are interested. And I love to take an humble approach to leadership, that servant leader approach almost as well, making sure everyone around you is as good, if not better than you. That's how you raise the company up. So I love that. And last question before I let you get back to building the business. If you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice, knowing what you know now, what would it be?
Yes, I think I wouldn't be so structured in my plans. The first semester at Cornell, they make you plan out how you would graduate. So you were a freshman with 1 month of experience at college, and they were already having you build out a 4-year plan of what classes you were going to take and what career you wanted to pursue. And it gave you a certain stress about, wow, I have to decide what my career and what my life is going to look like day one. And I took that and I essentially went even further. I basically wrote a whole plan. I was going to go to a bulge bracket investment bank. I was going to go to a mega fund, and I was going to be a partner in Blackstone, and I was going to live in New York City in a penthouse and live happily ever after. That was my plan as a freshman at Cornell. And life doesn't turn out to be that way. And I would have never pictured what my life is today. It would have never been my plan, but a lot of things happen for a reason. And so I got placed in FIG. And if I hadn't gotten placed in FIG, then I would have never seen HIG as an opportunity. And HIG allowed me to move to Miami, where we have wonderful friends and family, and it's a place that we love and don't want to leave. And then if I hadn't been at HIG, I would not have been pushed to go to Harvard Business School to get my VP promotion. And then that transition allowed me to start Edgewater. And so I became a partner of a professional services firm, of an advisory firm, faster than I ever would have. But it went through a very different path than I had originally anticipated. And I hit a lot of disappointments along the way because of how rigid I was with my plans. But I wouldn't have it any other way today.
A fantastic way to end. And I don't, best laid plans until you get punched in the face.
Exactly.
You know how it is. And I think being flexible, rolling with the punches, seeing the opportunities and going for that is a great mantra for everybody listening. Hawken, pleasure. As I said, the story's inspiring. I love what you're doing at Edgewater Strategy. We love supporting you with the deal toys for the numerous successes you're having, and best of luck for the next phase of growth.
Thank you so much, Peter. This has been wonderful. Appreciate it.
This episode of the podcast was brought to you by the Investment Banking Leaders Club. And to keep leveling up your career, join the club at ibleadersclub.com for exclusive insights, leadership strategies, and career growth resources straight from the industry's top professionals. I want to say thanks to our key partner, Outram, the global leader in financial deal gifts, awards, and recognition, for their ongoing support of our mission to empower both aspiring and senior investment banking leaders. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, best of luck on your growth journey.